Hello, AP World Historians. I hope everybody's doing all right. This is your AP World History teacher, Ben Osborne. It is a beautiful Sunday morning outside, but I'm here with you because I know what you need is some of this amazing AP World History knowledge right here. So I'm going to let my wife work out in the yard while I talk to you a little bit about Europe, specifically this time period called the Middle Ages. Now, this is kind of the time period we think of a lot when we think about history in Europe. If you're a fan of fantasy and science fiction like I am, you probably know this is a fantasy time period, your Dungeons and Dragons, your Game of Thrones, and such forth. This is where we get a lot of these tropes and things from. Not always true when it comes to these fantasy. That's why I guess it's called fantasy. But we still do have a lot of really interesting and important points for us to make about this time period called the Middle Ages. So Europe is supposed to only be maybe about 20% or so of our content, so we won't be doing Europe in a ton of detail all the time, not as much as you would get like in European history AP, but we will be talking a bit about this specific time period and a few things that are going on in it. So let's talk first off about what the term Middle Ages even refers to. So the Middle Ages is a phrase, well, if you think about middle, right, it's got to be between two things. So what is the Middle Ages between? Well, Europeans really saw the Greeks and Romans as this time period of amazing development. You know, think about you're living in Germany, or, well, not Germany maybe, but in France in, say, 1100, and you're on your little crummy farm, and then you look out across the field, and there's this remnant of a giant aqueduct of the Romans, right? So you see them almost as like these amazing holy people in a sense, like they could do all of this amazing stuff. So that is sort of our beginning period, is when Rome falls. Then there's this time period here, which is the Middle Ages. And then the end point of the Middle Ages then would be the Renaissance, which is something that we'll talk about here at the end, where they sort of rediscover the light of Rome. It's why this period is often, or especially the first part of it, is called the Dark Ages, because they believe they had lost a lot of that knowledge and intelligence from that period. That's very debatable. Historians very much debate about it. In fact, that John Green video about the Dark Ages has a lot of good points in it about whether that's true or not. But the point is that the Middle Ages are called this, again, because they are between Rome and the Renaissance. And so they're considered by many historians to be this period where things were not so hot. But in reality, you know, not as bad maybe as some people think. So let's check it out here. So talking a bit about feudalism. Starting us off here. So feudalism, again, is this idea that is held up by the Code of Chivalry. So feudalism itself is a system, a political system, whereby the people on the top are going to share obligations and responsibilities with those down below. So, for example, if you're a king, you are going to grant lands to your lords, and in return, then, your lords are supposed to uphold you as the king. So it's a mutual beneficial relationship. It has a lot to do with manorialism, which is a economic system, but they're not exactly the same thing. We'll talk more about that in a second. So feudalism then again is this idea of a political structure that's based around that, and it is upheld by this idea of the Code of Chivalry. So the lords of the king should uphold chivalrous ideas such as honor and stuff like that, and do their best. Now, not always carried out exactly. Chivalry has its ups and downs during the course of this period, but that at least is sort of the concept behind it. And this structure, this political structure, then, is one that's going to continue on in Europe for quite a long time. Generally speaking, it's sort of what's the way to put it? It's sort of anti nationalistic. You are in a sense the subject of your lord. You are not, for example, English or French. You are just the subject of the French king or the English king. So in this period, then, nationalism is something that we're going to start to see a little bit. So in addition to feudalism, though, we have this idea called manorialism. So manorialism is the dominant economic structure of the time. So when somebody asks what's the difference between feudalism and manorialism, they have a lot to do with each other. They interact with each other in a lot of ways, but they're slightly different. This may be a simplification, but the best answer in a sense is feudalism is more the political system, manorialism is the economic system. But what is manorialism? Well, basically it's the idea that you have a manor, which is going to be run by some lord, like a knight, or it could be somebody higher up. And that manor is going to largely be sufficient on its own. Like, it's going to produce and create almost all the things on its own that it needs to. In return, then, you're going to have a number of people who are going to work on the land called serfs. And those serfs are not slaves. They're not slaves, but they definitely cannot leave the land. They are basically controlled by their lord in a lot of ways. So feudalism is going to reinforce manorialism by creating these manners and creating the structure of control, but manorialism is the way that they sort of get things done to get their economics going on. Now, during this period of Europe, we're going to start to see from the very beginning here, the 600s or so, we're going to see kind of a decline in population a bit, primarily due to the collapse of Rome and the ability to grow food and stuff. But then we're going to start to see that change over time. And so during the Middle Ages, we're going to see a couple of examples here, such as the three-field system and also better plows. I'll show you a picture of the three-field system and also this thing called the Moldboard Plow in just a second. But just know that those two farming implements are going to increase the amount of food that people are producing and will be particularly helpful to gain more food. Generally speaking, the Middle Ages are divided into this sort of early Middle Ages, or also called the Dark Ages, and the later Middle Ages, known as the High Middle Age. The major thing that's going to divide that then is when we start to see this movement towards the gathering of power in monarchs. So while feudalism, again, is this theoretical structure where everybody sort of works together, the monarch and the lords and everybody else, in general, the early Middle Ages, we're going to see the aristocracy with a fair amount of power. What we're starting to see then in the High Middle Ages is the gathering of that power in the monarch in order to kind of dominate the aristocracy. And as we do that, then that's going to kind of lead a bit more to more of a modern European situation where we have centralized governments and things as opposed to the decentralized governments of feudalism. One example of this, we're going to do a couple of examples of places around Europe at this time. So one of these is what's called the Holy Roman Empire. Famously, I believe it is, who is it? Voltaire, maybe Candide, I forget. Famously, it is called neither holy nor Roman nor an empire because it is not, it is related to the church, but it's not particularly holy. It is also has nothing to do with Rome particularly. And also as an empire, it is weird because it has an emperor, but it has a lot of, like that emperor is elected and stuff. It's unusual. But this is really kind of calling back to the old times, right? Like they're trying to say, look, here's what we have. We have this very powerful structure that we're going to organize together in the sort of glory of Rome. But we also have, favor of God, basically. So the first of these Holy Roman Emperors is going to be Otto I in 962. This is essentially a German empire. Most of it will become Germany in the future, or Austria, places with German speakers. One thing that's kind of wild about it is that it has these things called elector counts, which you can see there, and they're going to struggle for power with each other. So basically the idea was that you would have like 7 or 8 people who are counts, and then whenever the emperor died, you would basically elect one of them to be the new emperor. So you could have different families every time that happens. In practice, it tended to remain within a few families over time, but still, the idea was that you could sort of do these different electors. It's kind of a weird example of sort of aristocratic democracy of sorts, but again, they basically jockeyed for power a lot and things like that. The church does have a lot of power in this period, especially in the Holy Roman Empire, but that's going to change a little bit with something known as the lay investiture controversy. So basically, I'm going to tell you what it is and then tell you why it matters. Today, Catholic bishops are appointed by Rome. This is not controversial. So when a bishop dies, then the new bishop will be appointed by the Pope, and that new bishop will take over there. So it's a top-down sort of approach. In this period, though, there was still some debate about how to do that exactly. So oftentimes, the king, the monarch of whatever country it was, would just appoint a bishop on their own. So they may find a person they liked, maybe it was a friend or something like that would uphold their power. So that's why they wanted to do it. But the church doesn't like this very much. Like the church, had some ways to resist this, but at the same time, they kind of had to do it. They didn't have a lot of military power or anything. So what are they going to do about it? And so basically this comes to a head. There's a lot of issues with these bishops and things. And so in the long run, then the decision is made that the church will make these decisions. But what that means, though, is that when the states no longer have the ability to do that, the church is going to lose a little bit of power over them. Like the ability for individual states to appoint bishops meant they were more likely to go along with the church, which means that when they no longer can do that, they're a little bit happier to sort of ignore the kind of things that the church is doing. So in the long run, the importance of this is basically that the lay investiture controversy is going to decrease the power of the church a little bit and probably lead to the rise of like Protestantism and secularism that we're going to see in the future. Okay. So a couple of quick pictures here for you. Ah, there you go, kids. I know everybody loves looking at wheat fields. I really feel like it's important to give you the kind of agricultural content that you're all, thirsting for in these videos. You want to talk about farming. I get it. I love it too. So let's do it. So here we have the 3-field system. Basically, the idea is to increase the fertility of the soils. The problem is when you grow wheat year after year after year, it's going to leach all of those good wheat nutrients out of the soil. And so what are you going to do? Well, in this system, then, there's a bunch of systems to solve this problem. Today, we just use chemical fertilizers. So we grow a bunch of wheat, we pull it out, we plow it under, then we put 100 tons of ammonia fertilizer we made in a factory, and then we solve that problem. This is not something that they can do back then. So what they do is they are going to plant one field in wheat, one field in barley, and one that they're going to leave fallow. They could also grow legumes in these things as well. So you're basically going to rotate it through 3 different fields. So one field is producing the kind of crop that you're really wanting to grow. One is going to be a crop that's going to help put nitrogen back in the soil. So legumes, maybe barley does this as well. And then one of them you're just going to leave to kind of let animals graze on and stuff. And so the result of that then is that these fields are going to be much better. So they basically have 3 years to heal themselves, in a sense, to be able to take wheat again in that area. This might be also, by the way, a nice little picture of a manor. You have the manor house over there on the left, at the bottom left, and then you're going to have a little church, some workplaces for people to live. That would be an example of sort of a manor thing, something where everybody is able to do what they want to a degree. This is a moldboard plow. Now, look, again, farming, I know you love it, and you probably love looking at farming implements even more. I'll probably make just a whole video where it's just farming implements one day. But this one here is called the moldboard plow. So in the Mediterranean, they would use what are called scratch plows, which is basically just like a stick, and then you would attach it to a horse, and then you would pull that stick through the ground. Mediterranean soils are very friable, which means they're very able to be broken up, so very easy to use with that kind of stick plow kind of structure. And the horses are able to pull it pretty easily. However, when they get to Europe, Northern Europe, like Germany and England, the soils there are much thicker. They're wetter. You're going to have a lot of plants and stuff on the top of it. Scratch plows just weren't really doing the job as well. They could probably dig into the ground, but it was a lot of work. So the difference is then, first off, they're going to start using oxen. So oxen are slower, but they're able to pull things because they're a lot stronger. And also they're going to develop this thing. So if you look there on the very front, you'll see that there's kind of a pointy, sticky thing there. Those things are metal, basically. So you're going to have an iron front to it. So that iron is going to be able to dig into that ground a lot better. And then also, if you notice, the little section there kind of rolls over. So the idea was that as you're sort of plowing along, you would sort of roll the stuff over to the sides. So when you think about like furrows in a field, like those kind of lines in a field, that's what's making it, is that it's going through the soil, it's cutting the soil, and then it's turning it over on the end of the plow to prop it up on the other side. And so you run this over the soil a bunch of times. You're going to break that soil up, make it nice and loose for the plants you're trying to plant, and then you are going to get some good food when you do that later on. So those are some examples of inventions. They're also going to start to use more wheeled plows, which can be a little bit easier to carry along, and different types of collars and things to help with the animals to move things around. This is a picture here that sort of represents chivalry. I tried to look up who made this picture. I have a hard time to do so apologies. I usually like to credit whoever did them. But this one is basically, that is King Arthur over there on the right, and that is going to be his lovely lady Guinevere, and that's Lancelot in the black right behind her. So this is a good example of sort of the ideas of chivalry. Hey puppy, hey, how are you? You gonna rub that puppy? Ooh, wait, let's go that way. Good boy, good boy. So this is an example of that. First off, you're going to see Christianity is a big factor. You can see that on Arthur's chest where he has the cross there. You're also going to see that Lancelot is the ideal of chivalric beauty and chivalric love. He loves Guinevere, but he is also tied into his king. So the thing in the story is that Guinevere and Lancelot basically sort of run away, and that's what makes it so scandalous. It's such a violation, in a sense, of chivalry. So the idea here, again, is that you are going to be good and honest, you're going to respect and care for your king, and by doing all those things, you are going to be a good knight. Again, the point of this is to kind of control these knights. I mean, these are like military warriors, right? So like, if you don't have some way to control them, they may try to overthrow you or something. So having this system whereby you say your highest value essentially is to be good to your king is why that's going to kind of work out. All right, let's take a look at some of these other examples and other kind of kings that are gaining some power. So in France, we got Philip II and Philip IV. They're going to establish major bureaucracies there in France. And eventually, so more power in the central authority. And eventually, they're going to call this type of body called the Estates General. So the Estates General is made up of the different estates or social classes, is what that means, of the realm. So the estates would be the clergy, it would be the sort of gentry, like the landed gentry, as well as sort of the like the wealthy and others. I may have messed that up a little bit, but basically three different levels. You'll notice, most importantly, that serfs and commoners are not included in this whatsoever. This Estates General then is going to advise the king. It's almost like a parliament, but it doesn't do as much. It will come back again when we talk about the French Revolution, because it doesn't get called very often, and it doesn't get called before the French Revolution really at all. And so when Louis ends up having to call it to try to get money to help pay for their expenses, they will end up taking on a nasty tone and turning into a parliament of sorts. All right, another good example here, we're talking about English history. We got in 1066, the Normans are going to invade England from France. So Normans were the descendants of Vikings. They had raided and conquered the northern part of France. And when they do so, then William the Conqueror then is going to be a guy who has a claim to the throne. It's a loose claim, but he's got a claim. And so he decides to invade with his Norman troops. He is able to win at the Battle of Hastings, where he defeats the old Anglo-Saxon king, and he is going to end up taking control. This is where we get a lot of French influence in like both English as well as the country in general. So like we have weird words like, you call the animal a cow, but you call the meat beef. Well, that's because the cow was raised by the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings, and that's Kuh in German. But beef or boeuf is the name of a cow in French. So you have the higher level people calling the food because they're the ones who are eating it, whereas the people who are raising the animals are going to call it by another name. William the Conqueror will create a pretty tight bureaucracy. The nobles really hate this, though. So over time, like way after William, there's a number of different kings after this. But way after William, then, we are going to end up having bad King John. And these nobles are going to really hate this rule, and they will organize rebellions. So these rebellions eventually will lead to this thing known as the Magna Carta, Great Charter. It was basically a way for the nobles to get the king to agree to some things. It is the foundation of a lot of modern democracy, though of course it does not apply to commoners. And will sort of lead to this foundation of this idea of an almost permanent parliament. It is almost immediately, by the way, negated. Like, as soon as King John gets away from these nobles that captured him, he sort of says no. But they continue to kind of bring it back up again and put it back into power. So it's more as a symbol than anything else, but it's still a very important symbol. The idea that the king had responsibilities to the nobles and others, that they could not rule on a whim, is a super important part of the Magna Carta. Essentially that everyone is bound by law. So be it the king, be it the peasants, be it the lords. They may have different laws, slightly different laws. The king doesn't have to do everything that the nobles do or the commoners. But the idea that they should all have some sort of thing like that is very important to the Magna Carta and important to us today. So one thing that's going to happen here that's an important long-term kind of thing, let me get out of the way, is going to be this thing called the 100 Years' War. So 1337 to 1453, you'll notice that's more than 100 years. It's actually 116 years. But the English are going to fight. And so remember, they have control of Normandy as well as a couple of other places, but they're going to lose those continental holdings. So over time then, they are going to lose territory on the continent, which will remove them more and more and will have a long-term consequence to European history. What we're going to see also in this war is that there's a little bit more use of gunpowder, and also the spread of these nationalistic ideas. Like, this is the first time really that English people are fighting against French people, and they know they have different languages, they have different things that are about them, and they start to kind of develop a bit more of a nationalistic approach. Same thing happens for the French as well. Couple of pictures here just about this war. You can see it does not go very well. At the beginning of the war here in 1337, you can see this little bit here called Aquitaine. That is from marriages, though this little part had actually been sort of lost over time. Then we'll see that there's a larger expansion there. Then you can see they do really well after the Siege of Orleans. So 1429, you can see that the French are losing, really, like 100% losing. But there are a couple of turnarounds here, including the capture of Orleans, as well as some skullduggery chivalry from the Burgundians and others. And so what ends up happening by 1453 is that besides Calais, which is this little tiny place here, all the other holdings of the English are gone. So they lose this war pretty bad. One reason why is because of this lady over here, who you may have heard of before. Her name is Joan of Arc. She has a particularly fascinating story. Picture yourself here, where the Siege of Orleans. So around this time period, things are going very badly, and the French are just looking for anything to help them out. And so here comes this peasant girl, like literally a peasant girl, out of the countryside, and she says she's had visions from God, and these visions are that she needs to be given an army so that she can defeat the English. Now, in normal times, they would probably just be like, "This is crazy," but this idea of revelation, or like God using people to do things, is not something that's unfamiliar to them. And also, like, the French just don't really have anything to lose, really, right? Like, she's like, "Give me some troops, I'm going to go lift the Siege of Orleans." And so, bizarrely, they're like, "Sure, let's do that." And so she gets her troops. They go there. They're somehow able to lift the siege. They're able to defeat the English and free Orleans, and then she is kind of famous for that. Now, after that, though, they're like, "Okay, great, good job. You turned this war around a little bit. We're going to go ahead and push you to the side. You know, you are a woman after all." And when they do that, she will be sort of sidelined. Eventually, she'll be captured by the English, and they will put her on trial for witchcraft, essentially, and then she will be burned at the stake. It's kind of ironic because she is actually burned at the stake by the Catholic Church for this witchcraft under the authority of the British, but she is actually a saint nowadays. So she's like the only saint who is actually killed by the Catholic Church, who was then given sainthood. But it took a long time. She was sort of like a lay saint for a very long time of France. Okay. All right, so last little slide here, and we'll have another picture for you. But so 1054, what's called the Great Schism, is going to divide the formal. It will be the formal divide between the Catholics and the Orthodox. So the big problem here, the question for them was, who is in charge of the church? Is it the Bishop of Rome, or is it all the bishops kind of together? So the Catholic Church believes that the Pope of Rome was given the keys to the kingdom of heaven by St. Peter, and therefore he is the first among equals. In other words, all of the bishops of the church are very important, very equal, but the Pope is sort of the first of them. He is the one who is the most important in a sense. The Orthodox Church was not a big fan of this. They did not like this. So the group of Eastern bishops and patriarchs did not want to do that, and so that is where this disagreement comes, and it stews for a very long period of time. And in 1054 is sort of the final straw here. Both the Catholic Pope as well as the Orthodox Patriarch essentially excommunicate each other, and that is going to be the total formal split between those two churches. Now, the church in this period was often a holder of knowledge due to literacy, so they knew how to read, they could read and do things. We're also going to see monasticism, or living within monasteries, is going to spread. The church were also big sponsors of art. They had the money, so if you want to be an artist, you're going to be doing a lot of art from the church. And they're also going to have a lot of influence on the states. But the problem, of course, is that all that power leads to some corruption, and we'll see the consequences of that when we look at the Protestant Reformation. The Crusades were called in 1095. This is Pope Urban II. Basically, for years, they had zero problems going to the Holy Land. But when the Seljuk Turks take over that area, they very briefly cut off the pilgrimage. They're like, nah, we don't want y'all coming here anymore. And so that really upset Europe. They immediately changed that, but the Europeans see this as an example of, well, if we can't go to the Holy Land, we need to go try to take it. So this is not successful in the long run. They're able in the First Crusade to take over some areas and establish these things called Crusader states. But as they go along, it gets worse and worse and worse. So by the Fourth Crusade, for example, they don't even make it to the Holy Land. They just basically go to Constantinople, sack it, and then divide it up into a bunch of kingdoms. Again, they are Christians. They have nothing to do with Islam or the Holy Land, so that's a problem for them. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of potential ones. The problem is that historians don't really know how many of these are sort of real and not. So, like, there's this legend about a children's crusade where a bunch of kids were going to go to the Middle East and convince them that they should, give it over to the Christians, and supposedly they were sold into slavery along the way. I don't know that that's true. There's some debate over that, but anyway, it's just kind of an interesting story. As time goes on, we're going to see increasing trade, which is going to lead to some changes. So, for example, we're going to see the rise of a middle class, like a merchant class, where people who have no titles or aristocracy are going to start making some money. So we see this in lots of places around the world where merchants are going to end up not having a lot of social class, but going to be pretty important. All around the world. Another example here is the urban urban growth. So as there is more need for trade, as there's more food, more people are moving to cities. So we're going to start to see bigger and bigger cities. Also, very unfortunately, the rise of anti-Semitism. So, according to the church in the Middle Ages, Christians could not be bankers. Well, let me rephrase that. They could be bankers, but they could not charge interest whatsoever. That was considered to be usury, which is considered to be a sin by the church at the time. So, the only people who could really do this, who were commonly around, were Jews, because they did not have that rule. So, for example, in England, the Jews were a lot of moneylenders. So, if you needed some money, you could go to them, and they would loan you money for interest. The problem, though, of course, is that this made them unpopular because, they collected that interest. So whenever people got really mad or whenever things went bad, they would end up blaming Jewish people. They would sort of raid the money lending houses. They would burn all the documents, and then they would basically steal all that money. Various times throughout history, then, we're going to see European rulers expel Jews. So we see this in Spain. Also, King Richard the Lionhearted, though he is known as this fantastic guy, also expelled the Jews from England at one point during his kingdom, during his kingship. Women, of course, are going to stay under patriarchal control in this period. Now, the expansion of trade that's going to come about in the late Middle Ages then is going to lead to this thing known as the Renaissance. This is a rebirth of learning again from earlier time periods. One of the things about this is that it's going to be very humanistic. It is moving away from the church. It is not anti-church. It is not atheistic. It instead feels that not only is the church and God important, but also human beings are important. So let's embrace both to a degree, but let's look at human worth also as a very important thing. It's generally going to be split into a Southern and Northern Renaissance. The Southern Renaissance is kind of what you think of, like Florence and Leonardo da Vinci and all that kind of stuff. The Northern Renaissance then is a lot of kind of other things, like, for example, Shakespeare here is going to be an example of that as well. Okay? All right. Here's just an example of that period from Renaissance Italy. You can see all the different little divisions here. This is an example of sort of competition as well, right? The Republic of Florence wants to have the best stuff versus the Duchy of Modena, so they would sort of like fund artists to build, to make like beautiful statues and paintings, and then the Duchy of Modena would be like, oh, no, you don't. I'm going to do that too. And so they would sort of all compete with each other for things like art or trade, and it's going to lead to a renaissance, a big change in the way people are doing things there. All right, folks, thanks for listening. Sorry I went a little long there. I always try to keep these about 20 minutes. Thanks a lot. Hope you got something out of this. Again, it is just kind of a brief overview, but hopefully it explains a little bit about this time period in Europe. Y'all take care. Thanks for paying attention. Bye-bye.